All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you all for coming here today. So as Andy said, I have been working with the City of Hagerstown since 2018. I was a new visitor to Hagerstown. I had never been to the city before until I got the job. And during my first year, to my access as a part-time tour guide, I came across these photo albums, and they were considered the reports during the archaeological digs, and mostly contained photos from the digs and the restoration. And I was just fascinated. I was working in partnership here with the Historical Society to update some of our inventory for the collection, and I discovered there were archives from her here in their office. And so I spent basically the next year going through all of those documents, and I had created a temporary exhibit based on the restoration, which is the basis for this presentation tonight. So my previous exhibit was titled Restoring the Hager House, Mary Vernon Mish and the Washington County Historical Society Save Hager's Fancy. So I'll be giving you an overview of all the work that went into this process, as well as a ton of photos. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or interject, and I'll try and answer as many as I can. So Mary Mish married a Hagerstonian here, Frank W. Mish Jr., and was an aspiring historic preservationist. Together, they raised two sons and eventually moved from Hagerstown to near Falling Waters to the restored 1730s historic home, made in stone on the Potomac. Besides the Hager House, another historic preservation. Why? Hold on. There we go. Uh, Another historic house she was known for saving was the General Adam Stephen House in Martinsburg. So you can see here the before photo and the after, and a plaque there, similar to what we have now at the Hager House. Another notable place she was tied to the preservation of was Fort Frederick. Here she is at the rededication. She was very well known and well respected by the community, and involved in lots of massive projects. One of her most notable was the involvement in Harper's Ferry National Monument. So initially the land was dedicated and designated as a National Historic Site, but there technically was no land ownership. So she worked with another partner to help acquire the land to actually designate and preserve so that no other private entity could change the landscape. And she was a huge part of that. So she has a huge legacy here with Harpers Ferry National Monument and Park. Over the years, she's been well documented by lots of people. I found in an article recently, she was quoted as an antiquary with a missionary's zeal. During the acquisition and preservation of the Hager House, it had been a dream of the Historical Society all the way since 1914. And as a resident of Hagerstown, she had taken interest in the founder's story and in the Hager House. She began advocating for its preservation back in 1935, and she soon wrote a small book, Jonathan Hager, Founder, commemorating the founding of Hagerstown, Maryland. This compiled her research on the founder while she was helping to fundraise the project. It was published in 1937, and we still sell copies to this day. Mary Mish would eventually spend about 30 years of her life dedicated to the preservation of historic sites, especially the Hager House. So here are some historic photos of the Hager House. These are obviously prior to restoration. The photo all the way on the left is basically considered one of the oldest photos of the house. This is about 1900. Not seen in this photo is a barn that supposedly burned down about 1914. And the other photos are sometime between 1900 and 1935-ish. One of the things I think is really interesting about these photos compared to ones we'll see in the future is this was when it was still pretty agrarian. So it was a lot of cornfields, not a lot of woods. Whereas when you get to these photos in 1935, you can see there are trees. So just in that amount of time, you had a lot of factories developing in City Park. It became less agrarian and more industrial. Just across the street, we'll see in some other photos, the Digby building was a factory right across the street. So it was more industrialized, and there was just a lot of tree growth. My favorite thing about all three of these photos is you can see there is a stream that runs in front of the house. Not only are there streams located in the basement, but it actually has other streams on the property. This is now buried underground on what I understand is a French drain. This photograph on the left is famously attributed to A. Aubrey Bodine, with a little girl that supposedly lived in the Hager House then in the 1930s. Um, all right. So Mary Mish served as president of the the Washington County Historical Society from 1942 to 1949. She was the first female president here of the Historical Society, and during her tenure, they were able to acquire the Hager House. They purchased the 9.5-acre property with the assistance of the City of Hagerstown for $6,000 in 1944. It was purchased from the Weston Improvement Company, which had basically been running the house as a tenant property. At the time, there were about 3 tenants living in the property, bringing in $20 in rent. So this is post Great Depression, just starting into World War II. So 3 people for the whole house was $20. Most of the restoration project was delayed, however, because of those economic strains. So work was not able to be completed until the 1950s. So this is about what the house was looking like right before they started the restoration. Again, very heavily wooded, overgrown, and just kind of neglected. One of the future consultants, an architect and engineer, Charles Stultz, was quoted saying, "The preservation and restoration of this simple, primitive backwood dwelling, typical of the frontier, is desirable from any viewpoint. It is a relic of a rich heritage and evidence of our early civilization." Forgive me. So these are some of my other favorite photos that show the house in like a 3D view. So you can see all the different sides. There was some sort of shed on the back. I believe they thought it was a like smoking house for drying meats. But for the most part, again, still pretty run down. So this is the condition we're at right now. Before construction could begin, the committee had to fundraise. They continued to rent out the property. They hosted dinners, held auctions, and attempted to drive up donations. They mailed out cards and commissioned a souvenir plate available for purchase. In order to gain more public attention, a local high school class built a replica in 1948 to show the original state of the house as they believed it to exist. So I'll go through a few of these photos and then I'll get to the replica. So here you can see lots of broken windows. The roof is in terrible shape and the bottom of the foundation is completely falling apart. So this is our west side here and the outside spring. This is the inside of the house while it was still being rented. Mary Mish there with what we know as the man in the hallway. And this picture we're going to come back to later. So this is between 2 bedrooms, and you can see there are remnants of what used to be, we presume, a piece of furniture. So this was missing. We can clearly see a mark on the floor of about how deep this cabinet was and the wood remainings. But for the most part, we have no idea what existed here. This was all the evidence we had. So when they were doing the restoration, they kind of had to make their best guess as to what would have existed in this space. And this is the cellar. So this is where the most damage is. You have to consider we have the water from the spring to contend with, as well as a decaying fireplace. So we'll get to this a little further too. They eventually rebuilt the chimney in brick. So this is a non-functioning fireplace at this point. So this is our replica. So this was made by high school students in the 1950s. I'm sorry, 1948. And this was put in a couple different locations to attempt to fundraise. My best research capabilities, I believe in the 1970s, it was donated to the Free Library. And then I don't know what happened to it after that. So we do still have the sign. The sign is at the Hager House that says Hager's Fancy, but the remains of this replica are unknown at this point. So here is our committee. By June of 1962, at the end of their project, they had raised in total at least $21,000 toward a goal of $25,000. And they would still need additional funding to complete a new museum and a caretaker's building next door. Today, in our numbers, that would be roughly $230,000. This committee included various members of the community. I don't necessarily need to read them all, but Mary Mish had resigned in 1949, ended up being served as the president. She left the presidency to serve as the chairman of the Restoration Committee. So here she is with a few of those members, as well as members of the contracted crew. So work officially began in 1952. to be completed by Wren, Lewis, and Jenks Architects, as well as J.B. Ferguson and Company. Mish worked alongside these tradesmen during the restoration, seen in many photos with gloves and a birdcage veil. She was a very well-dressed lady, just like we saw in the man in the hallway photo too. Over the course of the restoration, she contacted several historians, antiquarians, architects, engineers to give their input on the design of the house, the architecture, and their best guess of how to restore it. There was enough evidence to suggest the third story was an addition. There was debate over removing the third story. They almost returned it back to its original state as the model was. Ultimately, they decided to restore it as it was. So this is one of my favorite discoveries. If you tour the Hager House, you are probably very familiar with the stove, the fireplace in the kitchen. It was actually an unknown discovery. When they started the restoration project, they were digging around fixing up plaster, and they noticed there was a bunch of bricks behind this plaster work, and they assumed it was the back of the fireplace or the chimney. And as they started pulling away the plaster, discovered the mantle was still intact for the opening of the fireplace. So they ended up tearing it all down and restoring it. The flooring had been replaced at some point, so the hearth was no longer in existence, but that was a choice to restore that kitchen hearth. So you can see there the bricks inside of the cavity, the ice box that had been inside, and what was the remnants of the limestone chimney that had been torn down at some point. So this was what was left of the fireplace at that point. Among all these consultants, it was agreed upon that the house would have originally had wooden shingles and that the main level flooring was replaced over time, showing various widths and types of wood, including pine, oak, and walnut. Mr. Perry was a master carpenter. Robert Lakin was the contractor, and Richmond H. Miller was a committee member, and Cook Millwright. These are the gentlemen in the photos here that were the main consultants on this project. So here is the house in progress on the restoration. So here's another set of photos that I love. So the photo on the left is 1953. The photo on the right is 2023. And in both of these photos, you can see there is a color difference and a slight line of demarcation. I don't know if anyone can see. But also, if you look really closely, the color and the shape of the stones change a little bit. So it's very clear to see there was an original roof line. There is enough evidence to suggest that that upstairs window was probably expanded and that upper attic expanded. And if you go to the Hager House today, you can see this physically with your own eyes as well. This is another evidence that the house was adjusted over the years. So there was a staircase presumably added up to that third story. There was a section of wall where you can see the addition of limestone to patch in where the front door was shifted over from the edge of the building to a more interior location. I had always seen this historic photo of the black and white door, but in 2023, when we did some restoration work, we had to patch some plaster, and they peeled it back, and I said, hold on, I need a photo. So this is our interior view of that extension to move the door. All right, so I am way up on time. This is my proposed break. So I will take questions now before I attempt to continue. Any questions? So there's not an official capstone, and we haven't had a lot of the wood dated yet. The presumed build date is about 1740. My best guess, based off all the research I've done for the expansion of the house, is probably around the Revolution or after the town's founding. So that could have been 1760s, 1770s by the second or third owner. So Jacob Rohr purchased it. Let's do a little bit of Hager House history if you've never been on a tour. So Jonathan Hager purchased the property in 1739 for 200 pounds. I'm sorry, for 44 pounds for 200 acres. And he lived in the property for a few years and then eventually sold it to Jacob Rohr in 1745 for a lot more money. And he ended up leaving it to his son. It is presumed, again, by me and all the research I've done, that the second son was very likely the one who made the addition. So Jacob Rohr Matt, you might have to help me here. It's been a long time since I've done a tour. Jacob Rohr had two sons, and then his son had five. It was like a family of 10. And so you can imagine by that point, a much larger family probably needed a lot more bedrooms. It would make sense by that point. We're entering the founding of Hagerstown. There's more industry and factories and labor to assist with building something. So it would make sense to expand the windows, to add the brick chimney, to add the upper story, to add the staircase, and really improve this house. One other thing that I haven't talked about yet that I'll take the time to do before we do our break. My favorite thing about the Hager House, and one of the reasons I love to talk about the architecture, it's very unique as a historic house that was lived in all the way up till the 1940s. It didn't get a lot of updates. It is a true farm homestead. Most historic homes you tour, some wealthy family owned them. In the 1880s or something, they might have added a bathroom with plumbing for a tub or toilet. In the 1910s, maybe they added gas for chandeliers, or maybe they added a modern kitchen in the 1930s for the new family household. This house didn't get any of those renovations. It never had running water. It never had plumbing. It never had a bathroom. It never had any sort of electricity. I think it didn't even get a phone line until the 1940s when they were getting ready to start the restoration. This was very much colonial living still. And I think it's a great preservation of what that life was like. So there's not a lot of wonky closets where like a toilet was added or a weird addition for a kitchen. None of that happened with this house. It's very much in its original state as it would have existed probably before the 19th century. And one of the reasons it's a great architectural study. Any other questions? Yes, I see one in the back. Sure. So the city was officially, City Park was officially designated, purchased by the city and designated as a park in 1915. The section that the Hager House sits on, the plan was once the house was restored, that it would be returned to the city and be added to the park. So for the most part, from the 1915 period to the 1944, when they purchased the property, it was a park, but as I mentioned earlier, it was also an industrial area. So just in and around City Park, let me do a quick count. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 factories within the block or within the park limits, like that sat on the property or surrounded the property. So while it was the city park, you had the railroad right next door. You had a rubber store, a fabrics, not store, factory, a rubber factory, I think a fabric factory. There was an ice plant. There was a mill. So lots of industry in this area. So even though it was the city park, it was very hustling and bustling at the time too. Great question. Yes, I see another one in the back. Yes, I will do my best to answer it.
English she was female taking on this kind of role.
Yes.
So were there other women that were doing these kinds of things? And was she from Hagerstown? What did her husband do? It sounds like maybe she had some deep pockets.
Yes. So early Mish history is a little vague. I haven't done a specific biographical research on her. So she was not from Hagerstown. Her father, I think, worked for a newspaper, either in like Chicago or New York or something like that. And her husband, I never actually saw a specific profession, but his family had judgeships. So they were a very well respected, like you said, kind of deep pocket family. So they were well known. A big part of that too, with the conversation about women. So typically, and this is where like the gender politics gets into play, but typically men had jobs and, went to work every day. So if you were a woman who maybe your children were already raised and, off to college or something, what do you do with your time? You find your passion projects. And for her, that was historic preservation. So what do you do with your time? You write letters, you fundraise, you go out to visit historic sites and consult with historians or archaeologists who maybe have the degrees who can support your vision and back up your plan to save these properties. So she by no means was the only one. There is a slight trend in this time period that a lot of times these were women who this was their passion and their unofficial job. So they were considered amateurs. And after this is really when you see the growth of not military, museum professionals and historic preservation. She's one of the first like pioneers of that. You see that, and we'll get to that at the end when I talk a little bit about the end of her life. That came about more in the 60s, where you see the recognition that this is actually a profession. This isn't something that has to stay an amateur passion project. You can actually be paid and educated to do this, and that's something that should be invested in. So yeah, she was part of that movement. Great question. Yes.
So all this restoration work was being done by volunteers? Were they seeking out people who knew stonework and metalwork?
So for the most part, they were contracted with a contractor and an architect that was being paid with the funding. But volunteers were definitely welcome. When it comes to the archaeology dig, they definitely made use of volunteers. The fundraising was a lot of volunteer hours, historical society members, people doing this on their time off. But as far as the physical work on the construction, most of that was paid labor. Yep. Any other? Yes.
What happened to Jonathan Hager when he left?
Oh, he went on to many other things. So,
Did he move to?
yes. So it's a convoluted story that I'm going to touch on very briefly. So he purchased other land. There's a couple years where we're not quite sure where he lived because he owned a couple different properties, and this one wasn't quite in his name yet, and this person maybe hadn't moved in yet. So there's a couple years where we don't really know where he lived, but he eventually moved to a second residence, which is known as Hager's Delight, which is kind of near the Garland Grove area. That property was torn down more than 100 years ago, so we don't know its exact location, but that general area would have been his second property where he presumably raised his kids. His two children were raised at that property. All right. Are we at a stopping point? Okay. Thank you for the questions. Right. Oh.
When did Jonathan Hager come to the United States?
1736.
How old?
22.
What was his source of income?
He had many professions. So locally, he would have been a farmer, fur trader, but he was known to be a trained gunsmith and blacksmith. So that probably was his main income when he first moved. Yeah.
This collection of stones in the front of this photo here, is that another building? Is that the foundation of it, or is it just a bunch?
We're going to get to that after the intermission. You're jumping ahead. All right, thank you all so much for the questions. So I think we're going to go ahead and take our intermission now. Break for food and drinks, and
well, maybe one of those coffee. Yeah.
Probably request a coffee, but General Adams Stevens house in Martinsburg.
Okay.
Yep.
Take it somewhere and get a G-play made or something like that. What do you think we should, that portrait you see, that painting, so it's in where?
The Adams Stevens house in
So you should try. I just let you jump right back. That's on the stuff.
All right, I think we are just getting ready to start again. Everyone would like to find their seats.
Look at them strangling.
Like a principal,
Yeah.
headmaster.
That's the best one.
Right. Abigail, I just want to make sure I'm good. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with part 2 of tonight's presentation. So as Andy said at the beginning of the night, it is April, which is Maryland Archaeology Month. So what better way to celebrate that month than remembering what was known as the finest 18th century archaeological dig in the state of Maryland back in the 1950s. According to Mish, in her article she published, The Archaeological Bonanza, the Hager House Midden, When construction began, one of the architects noticed an archway enclosed with dry laid stones underneath the porch, estimated to be sealed prior to the Civil War. On April 18th, 1952, they discovered what came to be known as the Hager House Midden, a refuse heap or dump, a trash pit, usually consisting of bones, shells, and artifacts associated with human settlements or occupations. Mish expected to find small items, things that may have fallen between floorboards. Instead, she discovered a stratified layer of artifacts. This enclosed space provided a rich collection of artifacts, including ceramics, buttons, coins, timbers, ironwork, glassware, and more. Many of the ceramics were decorative presentation pieces, including an eagle ornamented charger, as seen in the photo there. This is what led to a further archaeological excavation. So the photos we see on the right are just beside the porch. So this is Mish beneath the porch. If you go to tour the Hager House, you can actually see where this hole has been resealed. So in that section there, under the porch, there were enough significant high quality pieces that they were able to piece things entirely back together. Plates, chargers, bowls, just all sorts of pottery and glassware. The best, kind of most preserved pieces were what was eventually put on display in the museum, which we'll get to in a little bit. But they knew there was more to be discovered on the property. So she reached out to a friend and partner, Dr. Chanley Foreman. He was a known art historian and kind of an amateur archaeologist, and he led a further excavation along the side of the west wall of the house. In May of 1953, they were able to discover a contiguous foundation on the western wall, believed to be a remnant of the first dwelling house where they believe that prior existed to Hager purchasing the property. Many of the objects discovered in this section were from the mid-1700s all the way to the Civil War and even into the 20th century. One of Mish's other famous interests was the treasure trove of buttons discovered. She wrote a second article called The Button Cache at the Hager House. She described discovering approximately 500 buttons spanning between 1735 to 1860. In her article, she describes the 58 inches of ground fill that was sifted through beneath the porch, including a variety of styles of buttons: bone, pearl, wood, metal, leather, glass, and cloth covered. The first 2 days of these digs produced the highest quality and quantity of the discoveries. They continued the dig with Dr. Foreman, like I said, in February 1953. During his eagerness to complete the excavation, she noted in her article they endured 8-degree temperatures by Mish, Foreman, and several of the high school students there in the photo, layered up with many, many coats and scarves and hats. They sifted through the layers in a formal grid, and we'll get to a picture in just a minute. Okay, so here we can see a gentleman beneath the porch and the foundation here. Here we can see the foundation with Dr. Foreman in the photo and another kind of up close of that foundation. So this is now back underground. If you go to see the Hager House, there's a walkway and a garden that kind of cover it up, but we know this is beneath it, and it is connected to the house. So the assumption is at some point they might have existed at the same time, or that they're part of the same structure. So this is a drawing done by Dr. Foreman. This shows the contiguous foundation as well as some of the sections that they divided out. I'm just noticing actually the version I'm using doesn't have the grid on it, but there was a grid that had sections labeled out. So 2A, 3D, 2E, whatever it was. If you ever toured the Hager House and went into the museum, which we'll talk about again in the future, there was probably a really weird label underneath a shard of ceramic that would say 2C. And you're like, what the hell's 2C? That tells you what part of the grid that piece was discovered from. Another unique code they used was WW, which stood for West Wall, which meant it was found outside somewhere along the grid, but for some reason they didn't remember what part of the grid. So this was the secret code, if you ever visited the Hager House, to figure out where these objects were found. A lot of the rest of it was UPHH, Under Porch Hager House. High tech. So these were his drawings. Eventually, he had several other pictures, which I wish I could include them all, but there's lots of pictures to look at. These are online through the Library of Congress, and we have a couple copies as well at the Hager House. So he had some colored sketches, some line art, as well as some of the historic photos of the Hager House. So this is another hand-drawn drawing he made, especially noting some specific objects that were found that eventually went on display. My favorite one, it's kind of hard to see. Underneath each hinge, it says brass peacock. It's labeled as a gun ornament. A very unique piece. But you can see lots of different things spread around the property, and then under the porch there, the area of the 1952 excavations and major finds. So this is all Dr. Foreman's handwriting and his artistic work as that art historian. All right, so this was part of the next challenge. So they had been working on restoring the house. The plan was to turn it into a museum. They would need to put something inside of it. During the dig, they had caught the attention of the Smithsonian Institute, who was able to assist with temporary storage of the artifacts, as well as preserving them so that they would not continue to deteriorate, and many of Mish's connections assisted with that project. In 1953, they had completed the stonework inside the house and were ready to continue pursuing fundraising for furnishings. So they developed the Friends of the Jonathan Hager House, and this was a nonprofit organization who specifically was seeking fundraising or outright purchasing objects to furnish the house. So there would be a couple store displays around town where they would display artifacts. So this is that souvenir plate they had commissioned. There also were routinely newspaper articles published. So whether it was something found in the dig, new pieces of furniture purchased, this was public interest. Everything got documented in the newspaper. So if you were to be around in the 1950s, probably every week there was an update. What's going on at the Hager House? This was big news in Hagerstown. So here's the house in 1953. At this point, this is the only space that is completed and open to the public for viewing on special occasions. So they had started to furnish it. You can see the stonework is still exposed, and there is now a stone ground, a stone floor. This was done as part of the stabilization of the building. So they decided, instead of leaving like a dirt or clay floor, they wanted more of a stable concrete foundation. So they overlaid that with stones to create a more historic effect. And you can see also the exposed plaster, mud, and straw between the beams as well. Yes.
In the 1940s, there were 3 different families.
So when they purchased it in 1944, there were currently 3 different families or couples living in it. After that, they usually had at least one person living on site to protect the house, mostly to make sure it wasn't being damaged or tools weren't being stolen. So throughout the entire project, typically someone still lives somewhere on the property. Yep. Yes. I mean, it's camping basically. You do have a nice, lovely in-ground pool. But yes, again, no modern amenities, no electricity, no plumbing. Yeah, it's rustic for sure. So here it is where they whitewash the walls, getting ready for officially granting the house back to the city, which was done in 1954. Getting caught up on my notes. Okay, so something I didn't mention earlier. So when they were looking for furnishings for the house, they were trying to stay close to the local region. So they specifically were hunting 18th century artifacts. They did extend a little bit into the 19th century. Again, if you've been to the Hager House, you might have heard the story before, but eventually the family that owned it were the Hammonds. They lived there roughly the 1830s and 40s, and they were the last family to live and own and reside in the property. So the furnishings kind of extended from Hager's period through the Hammonds, but they purchased objects from Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, including the different Appalachian regions, into the Shenandoah Valley and up into Pennsylvania, where there's a strong German and Dutch culture. Also, ultimately, the trash pit acted as a guide for furnishings and restoring the house. Many shards of pottery and glass informed the Friends group about what was going to be purchased. So it told them a little bit more about what type of plates to buy or what type of cups might have been appropriate for this house. So here are some of those remnants. We have boxes and boxes. So in total, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but there was 14,000 ceramic shards, 17,000 glass shards, who knows how many nails, how many horseshoes, doll parts, clothing, shoe parts, just everything. And we store it all at the Hager House. So here we are, 1954. The state had officially given a historical designation marker, which is on Route 11. And the house had been kind of completed and given over to the city of Hagerstown. They officially took ownership in 1954, and that side of the railroad track was to become part of City Park. Work proceeded on a new adjacent building that Mish referred to as the Lodge. It would become a museum and caretaker's apartment. So here's more of the basement once it was furnished. The outside spring with Mish. And it again all furnished. So furs to represent his trade. Lots of pewterware, glassware, ceramics, and our lovely fireplace that was restored. And these are the upstairs bedrooms and the lovely landing. So remember that giant hole in the wall? This is their solution. So on one side, it is a cabinet, and on the other side is a nice paneled wall. One of my working theories is part of the reason maybe it was taken down was knowing we had multiple tenants. The way the house is designed, that upper story, the only way to get from one room to the other was to walk through the third bedroom. So my thought was maybe they took that out as a way to connect all the bedrooms so you could go kind of in a big circle without disturbing the other bedroom. So this was their conclusion. This is what they built, a shy, narrow cabinet. So here we were, they were building their lodge, and the original plan was actually an 18th century village. Something very similar to what the Ag Center has now, with wood log cabins depicting kind of colonial homestead farm life. Ultimately, that plan was scrapped. They just didn't have enough money. They were barely able to scrap enough together to get the caretaker's cottage and the museum built. And it was a rush. They were trying to complete it in time for the bicentennial in 1962. In 1961, Mish was appointed by the governor as a founding trustee of the Maryland Historical Trust. So this is where that professionalism comes in. She was recognized for her efforts among the state. In 1962, she received the first ever Maryland Heritage Award from the Maryland Historical Society, which was considered the state's most prestigious preservation honors. So she was finally getting all the recognition due to her. The museum was officially dedicated August 1931 in 1962. The exhibits, however, were not yet completed. They weren't finally finished until 1967 at a second dedication ceremony with Mary Mish. This photo here, I'm not sure if it's still in this room or not. It used to be in this room. The leather basket there used to be on display at the Hager House. It is now in this building. So it's somewhere in the house if you have any interest. This is a famous leather key basket. Very well-known popular historic artifact. If anyone has any interest in them, it's fascinating. So here is the house then with the adjacent museum. So here is the plaque dedicated to Mary Vernon Mish. She was dedicated and honored for her tireless efforts to restore the Hager House and presented with the plaque in honor of her mounted physically on the building. In 1967, when that museum was completed and the exhibits finally completed, over 7,000 people came to tour the house. We're lucky if we get 4,000 now. So a lot of people came to see this property. Unfortunately, she passed away the following year in 1968 at the age of 63. Congressman Charles McMathis Jr. stood on the House floor to honor her. He, quote, "She was a woman of lively intelligence, tremendous energy, and a deep commitment to the future of the Potomac Valley." The Hager House was eventually nominated for the National Register of Historic Places and finally selected on the register in 1974. It was recognized with a historic significance on the state level of Maryland. Today, the Hager House is in process of transforming Mish's 60-year-old museum into a modern new visitor center. So before, this was kind of what was modern at the time. So it was mostly objects mounted on a wall with a very simple label. And this is what had persisted for 60 roughly 60 years. So not a whole lot of interpretation. So our struggle at the Hager House had kind of always been, you needed a tour guide to tell you everything. And if you didn't have time to go on a house tour, it was hard to get information about Jonathan Hager or about the house. Upon my starting at the site, we discussed renovation. So we've been working on this since probably 2019. We've gotten a couple grants over the years to work on the design, the research, and we are physically doing a physical renovation of the space. So these are some early concepts. So you can see what we're working on at the Hager House right now. So we'll have a brand new display for Little High School. We'll have some new artifact displays, as well as a place to rotate out archaeological artifacts. So that was one of the other struggles, is once it was on the wall, it was on the wall. So if you came here in 1967 or if you came here 2 years ago, it was the same artifacts. So you've seen it once, you've seen it all. So we love the idea of being able to tell more stories. Even if you're not able to go on the house tour, you can still get the full benefit of the site, as well as maybe see some new and different things next time you come. So here are some very early concepts. Obviously, we're not going to show everything, but this gives you an idea of the type of work we've been working on at the Hager House. So this one here is our introductory panel on Jonathan Hager's arrival here to Pennsylvania, and his purchase of Hager's Fancy, as well as the restoration of the Hager House there. I think that might be my last slide. I went very quickly. Let me make sure I've said everything I needed to say.
His property was called Hager's Fancy.
His very first property, that is the plat name. All right, so yeah, so if funding is secured and we are actually able to move toward fabrication, we hope to reopen with our new designs by 2028. So wish us luck that we get funding. Otherwise, we have a very lovely room with not a whole lot in it. So again, I went very quickly, so I'd love to take questions. If there's any photos you would like me to go back towards or further explanation, yes.
Do you have any comments on both of people who died there, the ghosts?
Sure. So I'm not the best person to ask that because I'm what you would call a non-believer. So he asked about the people who were known to have died in the house. So we do an annual ghost tour. Every October, we end our daytime tours and we shift to nighttime tours. As of right now, we still only have 13 confirmed people who have passed away in the house. 13 total. I personally have not had anything happen to me. As I said, I'm still kind of a non-believer. But many people have said they have experienced things in the house. One of them present, Matt. Reports since like the 60s and the 70s when the house first opened. And if you go to any ghost tour site, if you know, we have a reputation of being in the top 10 most haunted places in Maryland. We do not promote that. That is a public opinion. We do not advertise ourselves as a haunted house. We are a historic house. Well, but here's the thing, what happened. So again, I've been there now for 8 years. We get multiple calls. Hey, can we stay overnight for a paranormal investigation? No. It gets really out of hand really quickly. And if you say it once, so years ago, they used to when it was like new and cool. And then, I mean, if we did it to everyone, we probably would have had like 40 investigations done by now. And we're a municipal property in a public park. We don't need that kind of attention. We want to stay a reputable founder's home. So that's what we market. We are a historic home. So if you have your own beliefs and your own experiences, those are yours to have. We encourage you to come on our ghost tour and see it at night. It's definitely a new experience than going during the day. Yeah, so we do still, as of right now, still only are aware of 13 people who have died. None of those the Hager family. Those are mostly the Roars or the Hammonds make up the majority of those residents. Any other questions?
Online.
Yes.
Are any major attributions of the redware pieces in the photo? Do you know any of the makers of
No, so I'll go back towards it. See, and this is where I should have included more photos because I thought y'all were gonna have a million more questions. Did I miss it? No, it was back here. There we go. So most of the redware do not have maker's marks. Very few of them do. The decoration on them does indicate they are locally made. So whether they're specifically from Hagerstown or just the general region, but most of those do not have maker's marks. So the most kind of interesting decorative slipware is in the former display case. But you can see here tons of just like terracotta. Like tons of terracotta. So none of this has maker's marks. A lot of the ceramics are identifiable. A good many of them are imports. So there's all sorts of pottery. They were able to identify, gosh, only knows how many types of glazes. There's salt glaze and Jackfield glaze pots. And then, we have Stratford pottery, Stratfordshire pottery, Leeds pottery, just a lot. I could do a whole presentation on the ceramics at the Hager House. So those are more identifiable. And I would love, actually, I'll throw this out there. If anyone would want to sponsor a workshop to help put all the puzzle pieces together. This is a hope I would have one day. Some of them have been pieced together over the years, but I know we could probably get a few more accomplished in the future. So yeah, we have, I can't even tell you, Matt can help, like 60 boxes of ceramics. So that's solid. Well, some of it's whole plates and chargers and things, and then other things are beautiful, tiny, decorative, floral patterns from the 19th century or older. But yeah, it's so much stuff. So yeah, you can even see like some of the pieces that are on the case. This tells you also how long these things have been on display. Some of the pieces that are in the display case previously had been glued together. They've been on display so long, the adhesive has now failed. And the pieces, if they were glued like this, have fallen and are now resting on the table. So this was part of the goal too with our restoration and renovation of the visitor center was some of the pieces maybe had been on display too long and need to go into storage or are in desperate need of conservation. So with the new visitor center, we'll have improved display spaces for our textiles, our ceramics, some of our other books and things, so that we can appropriately preserve everything for hopefully another 60 years going forward. Any other? Yes.
So the whole house is gonna become a museum?
So the house right now is still set up as a historic house tour. This is the adjacent building. So let me go back to this photo. So this bottom right. So that right door, it's a tiny little room. It's probably as big as this room right here. That's
the rest of the house.
Yep, the rest of the house is still going to be as it is with a historic collection on display for a full house tour. This is a very small space. So before, like I said, it was a static display, hadn't changed in 60 years. So this will be a much better way for group tours, school groups, things like that to come in and kind of either learn on their own, or if we have groups, we can kind of split them up. We'll have some storage for other objects that aren't on permanent display to pull out as needed. And then we'll have a rotating exhibit as well so that we can kind of change it out every couple months or every year to keep it fresh and new. So this building has actually gone through quite a bit of changes. So the upstairs was the caretaker's cottage. Actually, to fill time, I have stories. So I told you how I read through Mary Mish's archives, and I tell you what, there's some wild stuff in there. Yeah. So not that wild. So this original building had a caretaker's cottage up on the upper story. The left white door was a boiler room, and then the museum was on the right with bathrooms inside. And then eventually in the 90s, they moved the bathrooms. The side room became the bathroom. They added a staircase, all those fun things. But the upstairs had, for some years, trouble with tenants because we didn't always have a caretaker. The first main couple that were responsible for managing the house were the Prathers. And of course, I can't remember their first names right now. Mary and George, I don't know. But they were there for like 12 plus years. They were there for a very long time. So they lived on the property and they gave tours. Basically, anytime anyone came calling, they lived there. So they would walk over and give them a tour of the house. But for a few years after those lovely people had retired, it was vacant, but they were worried about security. So for a long time, I'm probably not supposed to say this, someone from the police department was living there, and there were a lot of letters to the editor that they didn't think that was an appropriate use of funds. So there was a lot of like gossip and controversy over who lived in this building. Years later, we didn't need a caretaker anymore because there was increased security. And so eventually it was just rented out as a regular apartment. And today it's back as an office for storage for the museum while we turn it into our visitor center. But yeah, so this building was completed in 1962, and I'm going to show to those in the room right about there. Right in that bottom left corner, there is a tiny little penny that is used as its like capstone. It's a 1962 penny to mark the date it was established. So if you're ever in the park, you can go and hunt for the penny and see if you can find it there next to the bathrooms. So this photo here on the left, I think is actually from, it's actually, I think from like the 80s. They're very lovely historic sign back when the park was being renovated. The porch area was recently restored again in 2023 when we had worked on repointing the west wall. It had had some water damage, so we rebuilt some of the shutters, repointed the west wall, and then the porch got completely rebuilt. So that's all brand new, only like 2 or 3 years old now. But yeah, so the house has been through multiple preservation stages, and now we're focusing on the museum building. Yeah, and there's Jonathan Hager's waistcoat, which will be in the new exhibit as well. That'll be conserved before going back on display as well. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, bunch of hands. Okay.
What's the chain of title between the Hammond family and say 1935? Was it ever owned by the railroad or one of the industrial?
No. So majority of the park was still owned by local families. That specific plot of land, Matt can back me up here. So it went to the Hammonds, and their last 2 children split it, or no, they didn't want it, and they gave it to a cousin.
Yeah, and they formed a.
So anyway, it changed last names. And of course, I don't remember what the other last name was. It was Hammond Armstrong. So it was split between 2 families. And it was the Hammond Armstrong like estate. And for the most part, no one in those families wanted to live on the property. So it became a rental. So the first tenants we know of were there just before the Civil War. And they were there for several years. And then after that, it changed hands. By 1890, there were enough descendants that technically owned the property. They created a corporation. So that's when it became the West End Improvement Company. And they managed the property from 1890 until 1944 when it was purchased. So it was basically a third party that found tenants for them. And they just received the proceeds from the revenue. Good questions. Yes, in the back.
Being built over the street.
Mm-hmm.
Or the street nearby, completely over it. Is that control for that?
So actually, no. So the question was, is it unusual to have a stream, which is actually a spring, in the basement? At the time, it was not. So this is something you see a lot in parts of Western Pennsylvania and parts here in Western Maryland as well. So back in those days, it was typical to actually have your water source in your basement. There's lots of theories and hypotheses as to why. Part of it was a safety thing, an access thing. If you were the only family, for tens or 50s of miles, and it's 3 feet of snow outside, do you want to go get water from the spring house? No, it's easier to have it in your basement. It would maintain a better temperature. So that was what's great about the design of this house. It's called a Flerkuchen house. It has a central chimney. So the fireplace would help warm the house and the stone, and it would actually help keep that water from freezing. It's natural spring water coming from the ground, so it stays pretty relative temperature-wise. So it's very common. Some parts of Pennsylvania, actually, I've been told, have the stream run through the house. So it has an entrance and an exit, whereas this house it comes from beneath the house. So you don't see the source. It only flows out of the house. So not uncommon for 1730s era houses. As you get closer to the French and Indian War, when you had a little bit more stable community, maybe there was less security risk. You would see larger, grander houses spread out more on their estate to build more barns or more spring houses. That became more popular into the 1750s and 60s. But in the 30s, actually, in parts of Pennsylvania, it's very common. No, so that's the great thing. We're at the head of the spring, so all the water flows downstream. It doesn't ever actually backflow into the house, so it maintains a level. There's the maximum level, and then it flows out of the house. Great questions. Saw hands. Yes.
Now they have daytime tours, but then they also have evening tours.
So for the most part, our hours are Fridays and Saturdays. And as of this year, we're reopening on Sundays. So typically Friday and Saturday, you can tour from 10 to last tour at 3. Sundays, we are now noon to 4. Specifically, we do the night tours in October. So our ghost tours are at night. We also do some out of season. So we typically operate in the park season, which is roughly April through October. But we do the German Easter tours, which we just completed, which spanned from late March to April. And then we do German Christmas tours in December at the early part of the month. So those we decorate the house and you get to learn a little bit more about German traditions. Most of the other time, if you come on a regular tour, you get the history of Jonathan Hager, the property, and the residents. And then if you're really interested in material culture or archaeology, we can tell you all about that as well. Any other? Yes, another question.
Did you perchance know what area of Germany Jonathan Hager immigrated from?
So that's a funny question. As of like 3 months ago, we think we do. So in the modern name, we believe it was Christiansegg, historically part of Wittgenstein, Germany. So very mountainous rural area. So this is new research we're going to be unveiling very soon. We're going to be doing a press release and doing a big promotion about all the new research we learned about since Jonathan Hager Week last November. So yay! So we think we found his place of origin. We think we know his parentage and a lot more about kind of his life and his profession before he came to colonial America. So stay tuned for all of that. And we have our Living History event June 6th. So if you're really into 18th century colonial living history, we welcome you out. Yes, and we also have Hager Patriot Tours, which will talk about his actions during the preceding the American Revolution. Yes, another hand.
My wife Laura and I did the Christmas tour with Matt a year or so ago. That is an exception. I mean, you learn all about Norse mythology, a whole bunch of things about the way they viewed spirits and Christmas and everything back then. And I highly recommend that you do that, for it is exceptional.
What a great recommendation. Any other questions that I can assist with? Yes.
Civil War several times.
Yes.
Can you tell us of any connections, activities at the Hager House site? I know there are things in what is now City Park. I wonder if we could extend it across the road.
So this is not a specific area I have been able to study. To my knowledge, we have very little written or documented tales of things. There are some stories we've heard, but it's mostly like hearsay. So one of them is told during the ghost tours that there's an apparition of a woman hiding in a closet when like the Confederate soldiers were attacking and, shooting cannon fire. But specifically, we vaguely know who was living in the house, but we really don't know of any occurrences that happened during that time period. Obviously, we are aware of the presence of both camps through the park due to, one, its shade and to the natural springs water. But we don't just... I haven't seen any documentation of specific occurrences. Any other questions?
Civil War art.
Yes, we have artifacts that are from the time period, but nothing about anything specific. Not like you would hear in like Sharpsburg about like bringing in injured soldiers or having makeshift hospitals. We don't have any documentation like that. Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like we might be out of questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much.